In this video I've got a selection of cameras here and I want to go through these cameras, and hopefully this video will be beneficial to you guys who are looking for an SLR. Hello and welcome to another video in Paul Knows Photo, and you're not sure what you want to get. So this is all a budget video, so if you're someone who's looking for a brand new expensive camera and you've got lots of money to burn, this video is not for you. However, if you are in the mindset of getting a cheap digital SLR, please continue watching and I'll go through what I've got here for you. Right, so if you want to get into digital SLR video or photography, but you've got not a lot of money, let's say you might have £300 to £500 to spend, what I would recommend is consider one of the Rebel cameras. This one is the EOS 600D. This is ideal for the beginner. Its shutter speed count in terms of frames per second isn't very high. It's around 4 to 5 frames per second, not super fast, and it's limited in its raw capability in terms of its buffer, which means it can only take so many pictures before it has to stop, transfer those images to the SD card, and then you can take more, but it's not super fast. As for video, it has a flip out screen, so you can basically do blogs of yourself and you can see yourself. It's a fantastic camera for doing that. Basically it has all the major controls that you want, such as ISO control, aperture priority, shutter priority, manual control. Obviously there's a lot of extras there for novices and beginners if you don't know how to use it. Obviously you can do video. It's just standard HD video. It's not going to do anything outrageously super, because obviously you're only spending so much money on it. But it's a standard camera that can do HD video, and it's ideal if you're on a small budget and you don't have a lot of money. This is the camera for you. Right, you can pick these up on eBay, Amazon, ranging from as little as £100 all the way up to about £500. I know the most recent one that's come out is called the 750D, but you can pick up the older ones significantly cheaper, because obviously there have been a lot of cameras released since. So please consider the Rebel cameras. Obviously in America it's called Rebel TI. In the UK it's 600D, 500D, 550D. The higher the number, the later the version, generally speaking. But you should be able to find yourself a good model like a 600D that I have here for a reasonable amount of money if you're on a low budget. Let's move up the ladder a little bit. So obviously that's a crop sensor camera, so any lens you put on it, you need to times it by 1.6. So the next camera I have is a semi-pro body, which you can pick these up off eBay or Amazon for about £400. The Mark II version sells for around £1,000 new, but you can pick up an old 7D original version for around £400 to £500. It's a good semi-professional camera, has all the features obviously of the 600D, but this particular one can take 8.5 frames per second, and it's a more durable camera, and obviously its buffer is a lot bigger, and you'll probably typically be able to take 18 full 18 megapixel photos before the buffer chokes and it needs to transfer those images to the card before you can start again. This particular one actually takes compact flash memory cards. The 600D does take standard SD cards. My preference is the compact flash cards because they seem to be, for me, more reliable than SD cards are, because they're better built, generally speaking. But the 7D is an ideal crop sensor camera. If you want to put a big lens on it, you just times the crop factor by 1.6. The problem that you have with cameras like this is if you put or try and put a lens on, its wide angle capability is reduced because you're timesing the focal length by 1.6. So it can be a problem if you like landscapes, you like wide angle, you like doing interior photography. These sort of cameras might not be the camera for you. However, if you are interested, check out the EFS lens 10 to 18 millimeter, which in terms of its range equates to about 17 millimeters to about 25 or 28, something like that. It's a decent lens if you want to put it on a crop sensor camera. However, if you're looking for a wide angle EF lens, and you put it on a crop sensor camera, you're going to be disappointed because it will reduce that wide angle capability and make it more telephoto, if you know what I mean. Now here we have an old 5D. Now I picked this up for amazingly about £240 recently. Obviously the camera grip new was about £80 on top of that. So you're talking about £340-ish, thereabouts, for a reasonably decent 5D camera. Obviously the megapixel count on this isn't as high as a Mark II or a Mark III. It's 12, I think it's 12.8 megapixels. However, it is a full frame sensor. Now, if you're not sure what the main difference between full frame and crop sensor is, basically a full frame sensor is the same size as a 35mm film. And what it generally means is it allows the camera to capture more light. So in low light situations, full frame sensors is the way to go. It's a fantastic bargain for the price, really. If you're looking for the cheapest way of getting into full frame, this is probably the cheapest option. Obviously, if you put an EF 24mm lens on this camera, it is true 24mm. Unlike the crop sensor cameras, where you have to times that by 1.6. So it is a fantastic camera if you want to get into full frame and you don't have a lot of money to spend. You can always pick up a cheap EF lens. I would recommend the 50mm f1.8. So basically you have a fantastic portraiture lens combination and camera. It's fantastic for doing full frame images. You can take this to weddings, you can take this and do portraits, and you will get fantastic results. Obviously the older 5D doesn't have the high ISO ratings that the newer cameras have, but in good light conditions this should suffice. You have to think about what do you want and what do you need. Now the downside to the original 5D is it can't do video. So you could possibly think about getting the 5D Mark II that can do video, but you probably pay roughly, including lens combination, probably between £800 and £1,000. Sorry, and obviously that's substantially more than say buying this and a cheap crop sensor camera. You could probably pick up something like the 500D that can do video, as well as this, with lenses obviously, second hand, probably for under £1,000. So you could obviously use your original 5D to take your pictures, do your wedding photography, and you know, if you're going to do weddings you need the backup camera. Now if anyone tells you don't need a backup camera, I'm sorry, you do, because if your camera fails you've always got a backup to fall back on. So think about getting a cheap crop sensor camera to basically combine with a full frame camera if you can get one, that is. As for the camera itself, it's the 5D cameras are fantastic. They are so solidly built, reliable and professional. On this particular model, obviously the ISO rating only goes to 3200, but it's good enough for doing any weddings. So as long as you've got a decent lens on it, this can perform. Now I wanted to talk about this camera. Now you can pick this up between £500 and £600. This camera is the 1D Mark III. It's a 10 megapixel camera. It can do 10 frames per second. So in fact it's actually better than the 7D. The only difference really, or advantage you might think, with the 7D is it's got 18 megapixels opposed to 10. You've got to think to yourself, do I really need 20 megapixels, 50 megapixels, or can I get by with 10, you know? This is a professional grade camera. Now this doesn't have a full frame sensor on it. It has what they call an APS-C H sensor. Sorry, APS-H sensor. We got that right. Basically, it's an in-between full frame and crop sensor. So your crop sensors, as I said previously, you times your focal length by 1.6. On this, it's a bit less so. It's actually 1.3 crop factor, which isn't as big of a difference as 1.6 is. What's the difference with this camera opposed to, say, using the 7D, you might ask? Well, basically it's professionally built. Now if I take the battery out, as you can see, it's huge. It's probably 3 times the size as the battery that's in the 7D. Now I can have this battery in this camera taking pictures and not need to charge up that battery for 3 days. I can't do that with the 7D or the 600D or even the 5D. Generally you'll get a full day's worth of shooting out of 2 batteries in these cameras, but you could get up to 3 days worth of shooting in this camera. So while it might not be in terms of megapixels as high, a megapixel count as high as the 7D, or say a 5D Mark II or a 5D Mark III or the 7D Mark II, this obviously is professional grade, and obviously so the 1D bodies do last quite a bit longer. They are fantastic build quality. You don't need to buy a battery grip for vertical shots because it's actually built into the one camera unit, and it is a fantastic camera, and it's just really solidly built. Now you can obviously look at other cameras such as the 1D Mark IV that came out after this, which obviously was full frame, and obviously it's quite a bit more expensive. Obviously after that particular camera they jumped to the full frame 1DX models, which then suddenly jumps in price. So I think the cheapest 1DX you'll be able to get hold of is probably around £2,000, maybe £3,000. The Mark II is around 6,000. So obviously the later the camera is, the more the price jumps up. So you know, think long and hard about what camera you need for your purposes. You know, whether it be wildlife, portraiture, sports, weddings. Think about what you need, not what you want, because if you're starting out, you're not going to have a lot of money. I would certainly recommend getting a 70-200 2.8 lens if you're going to do weddings, and also something like a 24-70. It doesn't have to be Canon. It can be Tamron or Sigma, because obviously they're a bit cheaper. And you know, if you're getting into it in terms of a business as a career, I would recommend you probably go for a Sigma or Tamron lens to start out with, and then after you've built up a bit of professional work and you've got well known and you've got a bit of money behind you, then perhaps you can buy a lens like this, which is obviously the 70-200 2.8 Mark II lens, which is a fantastic lens, and it's probably one of the best lenses out there for Canon. And if you're into wildlife, at some point you'll be looking to get and step up to a 500mm prime lens. You might think about the Sigma 150-600 lens, but if you're a wildlife shooter or a sports user, at some point you'd be looking to get a 500 prime, either a f4 or an older f4.5 lens. It's up to you guys what you want to go for, but don't miscount and prejudge that second-hand gear can't be found for a good price, because this 500 Sigma prime lens, which is the 4.5 aperture lens, which is the DG 500 APO version. I picked this up for £800. Obviously I had to get a few things done to it, such as repairing the rear elements, so at the end of the day, getting this lens from America to the UK probably cost me, with import duty, all in all £1,500, which was a pretty good bargain. For a lens that would have cost you a couple of years ago around £5,000, it's pretty good going in terms of a bargain. Obviously at one point I did have the version 1 of the 70-200 2.8 lens. The version 1 is a really good lens. Don't miscount previous versions of popular lenses, because obviously prices drop. A good example of that is the 100-400 Mark II lens that's come out, which is brand new, but there is the Mark I version of that lens, which has dropped in price by at least about £800 by the new one coming out. At the moment, Canon seem to be increasing their pricing on lenses at the moment, and then offering a cashback offer. So guys, do think about second-hand gear, think about second-hand cameras, think about second-hand lenses. Just because it's not brand new doesn't mean it's not going to perform. The only advice I would give you guys, if you're going to buy second-hand gear, is try and obtain the equipment from an enthusiast, not a seasoned professional. Because a seasoned professional will have thrown their gear about, dropped it many times, you will have scuffs and damages on the corners. That's a thing to look out for if you're looking for a second-hand equipment, guys. Is look on the four corners, the hot shoe, the top of the where the flash goes, corners where the buttons are, the corners of where the buttons are. Look at the screen, make sure it's not cracked or doesn't have a lot of scratches on. Ask about the shutter count, and if they're not sure about it, ask them, realistically speaking, how many pictures have they taken? Are they the owner from new, or have they purchased it from someone else? Try and get an idea of history behind the equipment that you want to buy. All these cameras that I have bought, right, have not been from professionals. I made a point of looking into the history. An example of the 600D that I have here, more or less it was a return from someone who decided they didn't want the camera equipment. This one, the 7D, I talked to the seller on eBay, and he was an enthusiast that just got bored of doing photography and didn't do it anymore. The 5D had about, I don't know, I think it had about 2,000 to 3,000 worth of shots on it, not many at all. For a shutter that's rated to about 150,000 shots, that means this has hardly been used at all, so obviously that's a good bargain in itself. The 1D Mark III that I've got here, I believe he said he'd taken about 30,000 shots. Now the shutter on these 1D models are rated a lot higher than the consumer ones, so this should be able to take up to 250,000 shots before the shutter requires repairing. I hope this video has been helpful in you possibly choosing the right camera equipment, whether it be cameras or lenses, and thinking about the possibility of looking at used or refurbished equipment opposed to buying brand new. Because the thing about with Canon equipment is they hold their value, extremely well. The third-party lenses and cameras, not so much, such as Sigma and Tamron lenses, don't seem to hold their value as well as Canon gear does. So whenever possible, buy name brands like Sony, Canon, Nikon if you can, because they will hold their value, and it's a good investment. A lot of times you might buy a lens for a set amount and sell it for maybe £100 less than you bought it for, you know, and you might have had your lens for 3 years, so you've only really rented that lens for £100 over maybe 3 years, which works out maybe £35 a year, which is really a bargain for using such a quality lens if you think about it. And thanks for watching. Paul Goes Photo. See ya!